Welcome to Day 1. The 15th marked the 3rd anniversary of the channel, and as a way to say thank you, I've decided to put together another marathon for you guys. I've also decided to bring back the merch store for everyone asking, and just for the occasion, click on the link in the pinned comment to receive 25% off any item you like. I'm also going to be hosting a livestream Q&A session for Day 3, so go over to my Twitter to check on the dates and times. With all that said, thank you so much for an amazing 3 years so far, and let's begin. True crime and detective stories, despite being rather dark, aren't all that shocking of a thing to take interest in. Sure, you may get the odd look from your friends and family at times, but just like anything else, the interest in such things is perfectly harmless. Chances are, if you're a subscriber of my channel, then you're probably very much into true crime and mysteries yourself. After all, I hold a genre near and dear to me, and that often shows given the topics I choose to cover. Of course, just like any other thing that draws a following, true crime has its very own subset of superfans. We're all familiar with the concept of fandoms, hordes of deeply devoted fans who come together to share their mutual love for everything from film, books, TV shows, musical groups, celebrities, and even online personalities. Their loyalty is undying and their passion way stronger than that of a casual fan. These are what most would consider, for lack of a better term, normal or otherwise unsurprising fandoms, ones that you completely expect. Of course, if you spend any time on the internet, then you should already know that there are fandoms for just about anything. One of the most common questions people ask me is, what does my interest in crime say about me? Am I a bad person? Am I not supposed to be interested in such dark topics? My answer is always the same: no. Of course it doesn't make you a bad person. I see true crime as no different from taking an interest in what happens every day around the world, or what happens in the news. Why shy away from reality? Of course, there is a very, very big difference between that and, let's say, glorifying a criminal or being insensitive to their victims. Just as some may obsess over a celebrity, there are those who do the same for serial killers and mass murderers. Those who take it a step too far and identify with the criminal instead of just being interested in the details surrounding the case. Take this for example. In 2012, James Holmes made national headlines after opening fire on a movie theater in Colorado. The shooting took the lives of 12 innocent people, and naturally, public outrage soon followed, but surprisingly not from everyone. While most would greet Holmes' name with disgust, others reacted to the murderer with sympathy and, in some cases, even admiration and devotion. Almost immediately after the shooting, James Holmes' very own fandom had taken form, mostly consisting of women and young teenage girls. Of course, Holmes is not the only one to have a fan base. If you're familiar with this topic at all, then you may have heard the term TCC or True Crime Community. This is the hashtag most commonly associated with these types of fandoms, and of course, there is some controversy surrounding the use of this name since, as I stated earlier, there's a big difference between having an interest in true crime and treating a mass murderer as if he's Justin Bieber. Let's cover some history. Some might argue that things of this nature are simply a fad brought about by the internet age, but on the contrary, regular, everyday women falling for violent criminals is nothing new. Let's take into account the story of the Sweet Pea Girl, for example. In 1895, Theodore Durant, also known as the Demon of Belfry, was arrested for the rape and murder of 21-year-old Blanche Lamont, as well as 21-year-old Minnie Williams. During Durant's trial, a young woman by the name of Rosalind Bowers began showing up at the courthouse, always bringing with her a bouquet of sweet pea flowers that were intended for the infamous murderer who she'd become infatuated with. Bowers' constant courthouse appearances soon gained widespread attention from the public, who then dubbed her the Sweet Pea Girl. Because of this, even more people began to gather at Durant's trials, not to follow the case, but to see if they themselves could catch a glimpse of Rosalind. To this day, no one really knows why Rosalind Bowers, who was later revealed to be a married woman, was so devoted to Durant. It is, however, safe to say that she is an early example of what decades later, but pre-internet, would come to be known as a serial killer, or in her case, prison groupie. What exactly is a groupie? Google will tell you that it's a person, especially a young woman, who regularly follows a pop music group or other celebrity in the hopes of meeting or getting to know them. Others will often associate groupies with old-school rock and roll culture, using the term to refer to fans who are interested in brief, no-strings-attached sexual activity with band members, or even to do so for the entire duration of their time on the road. Now keep in mind, this is a blanket term, but more on that later. So it is safe to say that in order to have groupies, one must have fame, and it's no secret that the media, especially in the mid to late 20th century, loved covering murders. For many, the slayings of actress Sharon Tate and her unborn child marked the end of the 1960s. This, of course, was headed by the infamous cult leader Charles Manson, who quickly became somewhat of a boogeyman to the public eye. In the years to follow, American news outlets provided non-stop wall-to-wall coverage on numerous serial killers such as the Zodiac, Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, the BTK killer, and many, many more. And, of course, a lot of names mentioned here had their fair share of fans. Charles Manson's romantic endeavors while in prison were highly reported on all the way up until his death a few months ago. Ted Bundy, a man famously known for the rape and murder of several women across America, received endless amounts of fan mail and love letters after his apprehension in the 1970s, and even managed to marry and eventually impregnate a woman named Carol Ann Boone, despite the fact that conjugal visits weren't even allowed where Bundy was being held. Although Bundy was executed in 1989, fans of his still exist to this day, sometimes dubbing themselves Bundy Files or Ted Heads. Jeffrey Dahmer, widely known as a serial killer, cannibal, and necrophiliac, also gained a following once he was apprehended. In fact, so many people felt for Jeffrey that they began sending him not only letters but money while he was in jail, $12,000 to be exact. To this day, the public's obsession with Dahmer has never subsided, with endless books and films about the killer being made. These are, of course, just a few examples, but think of every prolific serial killer you've ever heard of from around that time. Chances are that person also had admirers and fans writing them endless letters and sending them gifts as well. At the dawn of the 21st century, news outlets, for various reasons, began to focus less and less on serial killers and began to point their attention to a new type of beast. In 1999, the infamous Columbine High School massacre took place, and the story absolutely exploded nationwide. This prompted a wave of fear from Americans, unable to fathom why two teenage students felt the need to open fire on their own classmates before turning the guns on themselves. The boogeyman was no longer a homicidal cult or a serial killer prowling in the night, but now America's very own tortured youth. Naturally, Columbine did inspire numerous copycats, including Sang-Hyu Cho, who was responsible for the Virginia Tech massacre. Another example, one from recent memory that I've made a full-length video on, is Andrew Blaze, a man responsible for a Columbine-inspired massacre that took place last year in eastern Pennsylvania. Andrew, already being out of high school, instead opted to target his own coworkers during an overnight shift at a local grocery store. Just before the murders, Andrew uploaded a manifesto to YouTube, one with an animated Columbine tribute which was also accompanied by links to hours of audio recordings where Andrew talked about his love for Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the boys behind the Columbine massacre.
It's crazy, like, Columbine just sucked me in once I started following it, and I've honestly never been the same since. I think in one of my classes I heard them mention Columbine and all this when we were talking about, like, big world-changing events or something, I don't know. But I never really looked into it until I was out of college. Pretty much last year is when it started, and it changed so much for me. I honestly cannot believe how much Columbine has influenced me and changed me.
Andrew even talked about frequenting sites where he was able to both learn about Columbine and share his love for the topic with like-minded individuals. It isn't hard to imagine that a crime as high profile as Columbine would inspire copycats, and unfortunately they are all too common. The actions of Eric and Dylan have also resulted in what is arguably the biggest group of fans any murder has ever garnered. Some even go as far as to call it a subculture. The fans, often referring to themselves as Columbiners, show their devotion to the pair of teenage killers usually through blogs, art, videos, and other online media, much like Andrew Blaze did. In a sense, these online fandoms are the 21st century's versions of the groupies we discussed earlier, with some fundamental differences, of course. For example, calling them groupies isn't exactly accurate, given the fact that rather than individuals looking to connect with the killers in person, these are online communities that form to share a common interest. It's also important to consider that while serial killers can be apprehended, most mass murderers, especially shooters, are killed at the scene of the crime, leaving their fans with no one to try to pursue. Instead, the fans are only left to fantasize and pay tribute to their fallen idols by any means they can. And now we've arrived at the question everyone's looking to answer. Why? That's actually an incredibly difficult and nearly impossible question to answer for one very huge reason. There is no single answer to this. Given that it's so subjective and widespread, it's completely impossible and also counterproductive to apply a blanket solution to why these things happen. The best we can do is try to divide them up into categories based on behavioral commonalities and explore each one from there. Before that, though, I just need to say this. The first explanation that everyone jumps to whenever they hear about obsessed true crime fans or people marrying serial killers is that it's all for attention. Now, keep in mind that the other two categories I'm going to explain are very much valid, but yes, just like you'd expect, there have to be a certain subset who don't actually hold any genuine interest or attraction to these killers, and are actually just simply looking to piggyback off their notoriety or to look cool on the internet. This is a rather strange example, but one that I feel to be very fitting. Luca Magnotta, the man known for the infamous One Lunatic, One Ice Pick murder video, was actually once a member of this group. Before his crimes, he made a string of attempts at achieving fame, all of which were unsuccessful, but perhaps the most notable was when he appeared on TV to dispel a rumor that he was actively dating Karla Homolka, one half of the Ken and Barbie killers from the 1990s. The best part? This rumor was actually started by Luca himself and was simply an excuse to stir up controversy surrounding his name. Surely, Luca can't be the only one to ever do this, and it probably wouldn't be beyond people to date and even marry someone for a chance at the spotlight or even a book deal. Again, knowing people's true intentions and motivations is nearly impossible, but I just couldn't write this one off. Anyway, disregarding those people, let's split things up into two basic categories: romantic and non-romantic. In the non-romantic cases, such as those of Sang-Hyu Cho and Andrew Blaze, they definitely looked up to Eric and Dylan and very much admired them, but at no point did they ever indicate any romantic feelings towards the pair. For those of you unaware, the general consensus to what caused Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold to snap was that they were both bullied or mistreated in some kind of way. This is something that people like Cho and Andrew both admitted themselves to latching onto. In these specific cases, what they saw in the Columbine killers were role models, people to aspire to be like, people who they saw themselves in. This is also a common sentiment found amongst many Columbine-focused blogs and websites. What they claim to feel the most when hearing about the shooting isn't a sense of horror and disgust at the shooters, but rather sympathy and understanding for why they did it. Of course, it is important to note that, again, this isn't the case for everyone who holds an interest in Columbine. There are also many other Columbine or true crime-related blogs that openly condemn the actions of Eric and Dylan and also pay respect to the victims. The romantic category is where things get infinitely more complicated. These would be the cases where, by the fans' own admission, things begin turning into what they describe as attraction and in many cases, love. The most common theory to explain this is that these people, who tend to disproportionately be women, have what is called hybristophilia, also known as Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. Now, according to Wikipedia, hybristophilia is when sexual arousal, facilitation, and attainment of orgasm are responsive to and contingent upon being with a partner known to have committed an outrage, cheating, lying, known infidelities, or crimes such as rape, murder, or armed robbery. Yes, that's a hell of a list. Again, this is where things are infinitely complicated. While hybristophilia could definitely help explain this, there is no way to prove if this is exactly what these women are experiencing given how subjective attraction really is. Plus, even if they technically fall under this category, the ultimate underlying motivations are still unclear. For example, interviews have been done with women who have married or dated male serial killers, and they offered a wide variety of reasons why they find them appealing. Some claim to see these men as hurt or misunderstood, noting that they could sense what they called the scared little boy in them. Most killers, of course, did experience some form of abuse or trauma as children that helped mold who they would become as adults. For Doreen Leoy, it was love at first sight after initially seeing Richard Ramirez's mugshot on TV. In a 1996 interview, Doreen can be quoted as saying, "They showed his mugshot and I saw something in his eyes, something that captivated me. It wasn't as if I knew him, but there was something in his eyes, maybe the vulnerability." Now, keep in mind, Ramirez was convicted on 13 counts of murder and 11 counts of sexual assault. Despite this, the couple, married in 1996, managed to stay together until Ramirez passed away in jail in 2013. Another common reason presented by these women is the rescue fantasy, the idea that somehow, be it through love or however else you want to put it, the killer will be rehabilitated and ultimately better off. They believe they have the power to change these criminals into perfectly normal and functional beings. Alternatively, some women have also admitted to liking the idea of what they call the perfect boyfriend. In this context, the imprisoned killer is the perfect boyfriend because the female doesn't have to worry about factors that would come into play in a normal relationship, such as romantic competition or having to negotiate living conditions. Instead, the free half is able to do as they please while having the peace of mind that their significant other is accounted for behind bars. She doesn't have to worry about violence or abuse coming from her lover so long as he isn't released from prison. On top of this, given the solitude that comes with being locked up, many women have claimed that inmates are much more affectionate and appreciative of them compared to free men. In this sense, the free half is completely in power, while the other is a prisoner both figuratively and in this case, literally. One very important thing to note here is that hybristophilia completely voids the blanket term we discussed earlier, groupie. Calling someone a groupie makes implications about their intentions, but if the fan has genuine feelings of attractions towards the criminal, then the label no longer applies. This of course begs the question, was the Sweet Pea girl actually a prison groupie, or could she have had hybristophilia? Could it have been something else entirely? There just isn't a way to know. Given all the speculation we've just done, I've decided to cut the middleman and interview the owner of a blog called The Cult of Columbine to see what she had to say about the online Columbine community. The interview was conducted via email, so to help me narrate the responses is the very talented Eden. Make sure to give her channel a visit once this video is over.
Personally, I have always disliked the term Columbiner as it trivializes the massacre and implies a fan base in which people idolize the shooters, although this basically is the reality, and honestly it just sounds plain stupid. My URL itself, Cult of Columbine, was supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek reference to the public perceiving the Columbine fan base as a cult, although I recognize that the irony isn't exactly explicit. My understanding is that a Columbiner is someone who identifies as being part of a community that sympathetically commemorates, or in some cases, celebrates, the memory of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the two perpetrators of the Columbine High School massacre. I would certainly say that there are different types of Columbiners. The majority are those who began with an interest in the massacre and either deeply emphasized or sympathized with the shooters when researching them. They do not condone murder and commemorate Columbine as a tragedy not to be repeated. I identify as this type. When I first heard about Columbine, I was actually more interested in the victims of the massacre and how they spent the last few hours of their lives. After finding out the shooters had been bullied at school, I did feel some sympathy for them, but I did not actively express it. A couple of years afterwards, I came across Eric and Dylan's journals online, and I was surprised to find that I could deeply relate to some of the things they had written. I was about 15 at this time, and I could empathize with their angst and depression, and came to a realization that they were ordinary teenagers just like me. A large proportion of Columbiners also identify with the emotional experiences of Eric and Dylan, and the boys serve as a reminder to us of how any one of us could have turned out had we gone down the wrong path. In addition to this, some female Columbiners also feel like that they could have changed the shooters had they been there for them. Eric and Dylan wrote about how they were jealous of their friends who had girlfriends, and it has often been debated within the Columbine community whether they would have gone through with the massacre had they found love during high school. Some of the more obsessive Columbiners who fantasize about relationships or sex with the shooters either fit into this category, or they are aroused by the danger factor. The other major category of Columbiners is the type of people who idolize the shooters and condone or fantasize about murder. This is the popular image of true crime communities as depicted in the media or online. These kinds of people are not as common, but do exist. This kind of behavior is generally frowned upon even within the Columbine community, and some blogs have even been noticed by the police. These types of people usually don't loudly express their views, as their blogs will be shut down if they do. Please note that not all people who dress up as the shooters or create collages of them idolize them, although some do. Most people are just so focused on what they see in Eric and Dylan that they forget about the victims and the immense pain and horror that they caused. I will also say that I do not often encounter the types of Columbiners that celebrate the shooters, as I usually block them, so I don't have a deep understanding of why they condone or fantasize about school shootings. People have different reasons for being Columbiners, so I can't speak on behalf of all of them. But this is just my observation from being part of this community for several years. I think that the issue of glorifying mass murder is a legitimate one. I've noticed that Columbiners can be pretty immature about this. Sometimes people in the community glorify the Columbine shooters without meaning to or even thinking about it. They're usually so obsessed with the shooters that their victims do not factor into the equation, and they will post things that are offensive or insensitive. However, a lot of them know that they are glorifying the massacre, but they don't truly comprehend it. Most Columbiners don't condone mass murder and are perfectly normal, empathetic human beings. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that a lot of them are capable of empathy more than the average person because they are able to empathize with people who are extremely difficult to empathize with. But they have been antagonized so many times on the internet that telling them that they are glorifying mass murder will usually only aggravate them. Of course, there is also the minority that intentionally glorify mass murder and egg on copycats. There have been several shooters and attempted shooters who idolized Eric and Dylan. There was actually a group of Columbiners that attempted a shooting and were arrested. One of them committed suicide, and I found out later that he had followed my blog. I am extremely wary of what I post because of people like this. I've had some suspicious messages asking whether a female shooter would become famous for standing out, and whether any other school shooting could become more famous than Columbine. I do not really have an answer to this issue. The purpose of my blog is to provide information of the Columbine massacre and the shooters for those who are interested, and also to inform in order to prevent such events from happening again. I have no control over how people will interpret this information, and it is difficult to convince someone that murder is wrong because any rational human already knows this. I have already partially answered this question previously, and it is difficult to answer this as I'm sure everyone has their own reasons for being attracted towards Eric and Dylan. Studies on hybristophilia have already tried to provide answers. They propose a number of reasons, such as the desire to nurture them or the desire to change them. I was once attracted to Dylan, but I'm not anymore, so unfortunately I can't give you a better insight into this. Even if I was still attracted to him, I don't think I could easily explain why. Perhaps it was partly because I saw many similarities between him and myself, and I thought that we could somehow solve our problems together, had we met.
Anyway guys, that's all I've got for today. This has been a highly requested topic for quite some time now, so I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, thank you so much for an amazing 3 years so far on YouTube, and I'm very excited to show you what I have in store for the rest of the marathon. Don't forget to check the schedule on Twitter, and with that being said, I'll see you all soon for day 2.